Hello, class. Welcome back to History 1301. Today we'll be pretty much wrapping up Chapter 1 and going into Chapter 2, basically the beginnings of colonial English America. So Chapter 2 is the beginnings of English America, 1607 to 1660. Last time I kind of dropped off, still where we were exploring, Europeans at large were exploring the North American continent. So I stopped off basically with Spanish and the French struggle over Florida. So let's talk about that real quick. So what's going on is that, you know, Ferdinand and Isabella, right, the king and queen of Spain, hit the jackpot, basically. As soon as they send Columbus, right? We didn't find gold there. But then Cortez goes from Cuba, jumps off towards Central America, Mesoamerica, Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, plunders it, finds gold, finds silver, tremendous amounts of it, and there you go, right? Spain becomes the biggest empire at that moment because of that bullion, all that gold and silver, and this kind of ushers in this rush of mercantilism. So mercantilism is this economic theory over nation states or empires. Our strength is based upon the domination of the international trade. So it's this economic uh, underpinning of the state. So basically, what happens here is like a zero-sum game. So the theory is that you have a certain amount of bullion, a certain amount of gold and silver in the earth. That's already limited. It's finite. So there's all these empires, nation states, competing for that finite resource. So the purpose of your empire, the mercantilism, is to try to get all that resources, right? Gold and silver primarily in this time period, for yourself. So you'll go and you explore for that purpose. Right? This is mercantilism. So everything, all economics, right? So you colonize and explore. You're exploring, then you colonize. Not really to go and settle stuff there, right? To go set families and plantations, and implant families there, but rather as an extractive. So you extract whatever resource you get in this particular time period, right? We're talking about gold and silver. So you're extracting all that gold and silver from the mines, literally extracting it from the ground. You're taking it across the oceans. I got my handy globe here. So you take it from South America across the ocean to the Pacific towards Spain over here in the Iberian Peninsula. So what happens here is that you gain all this gold from Mesoamerica. They go up to Cuba, and then they pick up the Gulf Stream, right? The stream, the winds. So we don't have waters back then, right? The ships don't have, it's just set. And they pick up the Gulf Stream and they go up through like, and boom, across the Atlantic and into the Iberian Peninsula. And that's like the trading route of Spain, right? This is the mercantilism at work. So you have ships coming from Spain with manufactured goods, like furniture, right? So that's already made, right? Tables, whatever, right? Chairs, right? Manufactured goods, right? So that stuff is being made over in industries over there in Europe, and they're bringing that stuff over here, in the New World, right? And then over here they drop that stuff off, and they pick up the gold, and they have to go through Florida and into Spain. So it's like this circle here going on here. This is the Atlantic economy now. Now we're integrating the New World into the Atlantic economy. So Spain has not just a whole fuckload of fucking gold, silver, but also this really good economy, right? Sending manufactured goods to sell over here in the New World, and then picking up raw material to make those manufactured goods. It's it's working out really well. The Spanish and the rest of the European countries don't want to get left behind. They're like, all right, well, let's see if we can recreate the success of Spain with this mercantilism. So, like I said, there's like a rush of this mercantilism in this time period. And at the same time, right, there's a lot of civil strife happening in the European mainland. There's a lot of religious wars, as I mentioned in the last lecture. So, anyways, there's a whole bunch of like series of explorations by the Dutch. The Dutch send Henry Hudson. He's an Englishman. He's hired by the Dutch East India Company, and he's hired to explore this northern passage. Still, they want to get to Asia. Asia's still like the main economy at this time, so that's still like the main motivation of these Dutch investors, basically. So it's a private company, this Dutch East India Company. So this is what you start to see now in history, and this innovation, this capitalist innovation of private joint stock companies. So instead of having, so what happens in the beginnings, right, is this like these privateers, right, these individuals, Cortés, Pizarro, plus we have Ponce de Leon, right? We have pues Coronado, right? We have all these men, and they're individuals, and they have to like fun on their own. The Spanish monarchy is just giving them permission to go out there on their behalf. They're not really getting money. They're not being sponsored here no more. It's like these individual endeavors. It's really expensive to take about 200 men across 300 miles of the unknown, basically. As a matter of fact, with Coronado, right, he had to sell like his wife's estate to fund that shit, right, to go up here, Paso area, New Mexico, and into the Great Plains. He was one of the first ones to meet buffalo, the West Indians, right, so the Dakotas and stuff. So interesting stuff. So, anyways, we have this rush of European countries trying to recreate the success of Spain. Spain itself is going up north, North America, which is now the South, right? Florida, Georgia, right? All that area, that Pacific, the Gulf Pacific coast there, the Pacific, the Gulf, right? The Gulf Coast, the Gulf Coast, right there. So they're exploring that area, going up. They're trying to look for gold. Right? It's this weird ass myth of the 7 cities of Cibola. And this goes back to the Reconquista. Okay, so when the Muslims began to first invaded the Iberian Peninsula back in the 1800 CE, some Portuguese families fled, right? And they fled towards the Atlantic, and we never heard from them again. And supposedly there were myths that they struck rich over here somewhere, some unknown land, and these were the 7 cities of Cibola. They dispersed into 7 like cities throughout the world. And Coronado, right, was one of those people that believed in the 7 cities of Cibola. They were like basically the 7 cities were filled with gold, and they were looking for this, right? They were trying to recreate another Tenochtitlan, trying to recreate another Inca empire, which did have a lot of gold, right? But they found nothing over here. Right? The best they could find was corn, right? For the disappointment of the Spanish. But anyways, let's focus back to Florida. Why is Florida so important at this moment? So like I said, all that gold that the Spanish Empire is getting from the ground, from the mines, is being sent back to Madrid, and they have to pass through there because the Gulf Stream takes them through the Florida coast. And the other European empires also realize there isn't any gold, much gold, at least in North America right now. Not until like the 1840s we get a gold rush. We're here in the 1600s. So we're 200 years before that. So there's no gold over here in North America, the eastern seaboard at least. There's land, there's Indians, but there's no gold. Right? And these Indians don't live in concentrated like urban centers like they did in Mesoamerica. In the Native Americans here in the North America, eastern seaboard, the south and southwest. Right? They're more like sparsely and nomadic, right? Still. So you couldn't really like force them for forced labor. It's kind of hard. They would always escape. So you have that issue. So there's no gold, and you can't really force Indians into forced labor, like the encomienda system as you had in the Spanish Empire. So like I said, the Spanish Empire got lucky. Right? They found gold, and they found these concentrations of of Native Americans that were already used to paying tribute to bigger empires, i.e. the Mexicas, Aztec Empire. That's why a lot of other minor tribes in Mesoamerica allied with Cortes to defeat the Mexicas. Because, like the Tlaxcalans, for example, they were paying tribute, they were paying taxes to the Mexicas. They're like, fuck these guys, I'm going to ally with this white guy and guns to kill my enemy. Right? So there was also already endemic warfare between these tribes. Same up here in North America. So you got all this stuff going on. Right? You got the Indians, and you can't control them. You have no gold. So what do? Right? If you're a French or you're an Englishman, right? So you go and become a pirate. You know, Francis Drake, perfect example. Right? He's like, you know what? Fuck this. They're trying to colonize North America. Why don't we just steal the gold from the Spanish galleons, from the Spanish ships? Right? Brilliant, right? So we just set up shop in Florida, wait for the ships to come, and attack them, steal their gold, and haul ass to some kind of English colony in the West Indies, and then try to make it back to London with all that money. And and honestly, this was Queen Elizabeth, and that's a whole nother fucking story. I should probably get into right now. But let me finish this right. Queen Elizabeth was like, you know what? No, we have a lot of strife already. We're gonna get into it right now. England, there's a lot of strife, civil strife. What was it? King Henry VIII died, and he didn't have no heirs, so he went to Queen Mary. Queen Mary was a Catholic. She was a hard Catholic, overzealous the Catholic. She went on this rampage, basically trying to get rid of Protestants in England, right? The Church of England, trying to get rid of that, trying to reinstate Catholicism as the main religion in England. So that backfired because most people were Protestant in England. She gets killed, and then Elizabeth I becomes queen. She's a Protestant, and she kind of does the same thing. She kind of does a rampage too, killing all these Catholics. Although, since most people are Protestants, she has the backing of the people, so it's cool. Right? Go kill the Catholics, Queen Elizabeth. So that's going on, right? The War of the Roses, basically. That's what it's called. Right? So you want to check that out. It's pretty interesting. Actually, there's a movie. It was on Netflix recently. It's called Elizabeth. Right? I forgot who the actress is. I think Elizabeth. It's like two movies, and it's all about that, about her dealings with the Spanish Empire. Right. So not only do you have internal civil war in England, Queen Elizabeth is also very worried about Spain, right, and Europe, not over here in the New World. So yeah, you have like the example of the Spanish Armada, right, where Spain tried to fucking outright invade Britain. And Queen Elizabeth was able to repel. So there's all this stuff going on. There's all this warfare going on everywhere, right? It's history, and it's just about war, basically. So you have these issues. And Queen Elizabeth is like, that's why she's not able to sponsor, right? Or didn't really care about colonization or what was going on over here in the New World. She was too preoccupied with what's going on in her own backyard. Right, so you have these heroes, these pirates, just going at it, really, with the consent, basically, with the tacit consent of the English monarchy to attack the Spanish galleons going back and forth with the gold and silver. So that's why Spanish in Florida is so important. So, in order to avoid, right, in order to defend their gold and silver via ship, the Spanish St. Augustine Fort in Florida, which is still a city in Florida. It's one of the longest inhabited Europeans, right, city in North America. St. Augustine, right? So they built some forts, and they built another fort up north, a little bit more north. That doesn't go nowhere. I think Santa Elena is what it's called. Yeah, Santa Elena in South Carolina, present day South Carolina, and just trying to like take out these French Huguenots, these French Catholic people, and these English pirates, right? They had set up posts there, and they're basically just pirates, right? Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Think about it. That's where it's happening, and these are the English doing that against the Spanish. And so these are imperial wars here being played out in the New World. And things that stemmed in the Old World in Europe are being also played out here in the New World. And in the backdrop, we have the poor Native Americans. What's going on here? All right. Let me take a little sip of this. So that's like the importance of Spanish Florida. Right? It's this protection of this mercantilist setup of world domination, basically by the Spanish. You have these other smaller European countries right now that are smaller. Eventually, they become really, really important, like the English and the French, trying to attack the Spanish hegemon of this new world. All right, so Spain right now. Just about Spain right now, badass. They go to the southwest again. The Coronado expedition is failure. They come back and they find nothing. They go to Acoma. City of Acoma is the sky city. They get repelled there, and it's just a mess. Then in 1598, a couple generations afterwards, they send another, or there's another guy, Juan Ponce de Oñate, that also wants to, go and settle up there, go and colonize. It's present day New Mexico. So he goes back to the sky city of Acoma, and he destroys it. Right? This Juan de Oñate. Basically, he cuts off the feet of every male of fighting age. So if you're of fighting age, so say around 13, all the way to like, what would be back then, like 30, 40, you you could cut your feet off. I think your left foot or something like that. That's terrible. It's an absolute terrible show of arrogance, Spanish arrogance, European arrogance, and the purpose of this arrogance was to show who was in control, right? So Juan Jose Oñate was trying to consolidate power there, the Spanish, and you're gonna bow down to us, right, basically. So you do that. This is what Europeans did, even with their own selves, right? Think about the English here, right? So I'm comparing the Spanish and English here constantly. This is the whole point of this lecture, basically. The English, before they came out here to colonize the New World, they already had press. They colonized Ireland. And just to give you a quick example, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, or Gilbert Humphrey, fuck, it's a piece of shit. Anyways, this guy, right, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, right, he was one of those conquistadors that went to conquer Ireland for Queen Elizabeth, for England, and he was a general. He was like a commander, and to show, right, that he's in dominion, that he's in power in Ireland, dominating the native Irish people. On his way to his tent, so if you wanted to go and talk to him, whether you were Irish or English, on his way to his tent, he ordered his soldiers to stick the heads of his enemies, of Irish people, on stakes. So you have like a whole like hallway of halls. I think that's what he called it, like a hall of heads, right, on your way to talk to the commander. Right? just to showcase, right, who is in power, right? Like, don't fuck with me, or this is who you end up with, right? Your head on the stake here on your way to my tent. And this is the same thing that Oñate is doing over here in the Southwest, here in New Mexico, close to Santa Fe. Right? Violence, right? Is power. So that's what's going on, and that pissed off the Native Americans over here. I'm now back to the Southwest, the Spanish. So we have this whole thing called the Pueblo Revolt. So the Pueblo Revolt is about it starts off as this guy, Pope, this shaman, a mystical guy. He's spreading this word. He's spreading this gospel, going back to like before the Europeans came. In order to do that, you got to get rid of the Europeans. So he's espousing violence, and we got to just get the Europeans by any means necessary. We got to go back to our traditional religions. And he was lamenting how integrated Native Americans were becoming into the Atlantic economy. Right? He was regretting that a lot of these Native Americans were drinking a lot. Right? We're drinking a lot of alcohol. It was unknown before Europeans. Using weapons, right? Even using utensils. He was against that because we lost our way of life. Right? And because we lost our way of life, this is why we're being decimated by sickness, warfare. Because our Gachila, our father, right, our father Sky is pissed off with us because we're not following our way of life. Right? So we gotta go back to that. And the only way to go back to that is to get rid of these Europeans. So let's kill them. That was Pope, right? That was basically, I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but I'm making a long story short here. And he becomes really famous along the Pueblo Indians. They call Pueblo Indians because when the Spanish first came here, the Coronado expedition, Panfilo de Narvaez as well. Panfilo de Narvaez, and when Coronado came, and Estebanico, Coronado's slave, they saw all these Native Americans here right in the Southwest, like the Mogollon peoples, and they were like set up in little towns, resembled towns. Right? They had buildings, they had windows in these buildings. These people lived in there, in these buildings, and they resembled towns like in Spain. So they called them pueblos. So these are the Pueblo Indians. This is the Pueblo Revolt. So in August 1680, this really becomes this Pueblo Revolt becomes wildfire. So what's so ironic about this Pueblo Revolt, though, right? And this is, I guess, like a testament to like the ironies of history and like to the notion of this borderland, where all these cultures mix in this one geographic area, right? All these politics, all these cultures mix together, and it creates a new culture. In this case, a resistance, right? This culture of resistance, because all the Pueblo Indians spoke different languages, right? So not all the Pueblos Indians, Native Americans groups spoke the same language. They spoke different dialects. So they really couldn't talk amongst each other unless they spoke in Spanish. So Spanish became like the lingua franca, right? Like the common language to do business among the pueblos, to organize themselves and revolt against the Spanish. Right? Pretty ironic, if you ask me there. Pretty cool as well. So anyways, they gathered around 2,000 warriors, the pueblos, and they went on a rampage, killing whatever they find, whatever white person they find, and icons as well, Christian icons. So 2,000 warriors went on killing farms, missions. The total was about 400 colonists, 21 Franciscan missionaries, including women and children. Not that many women and children though, because Spanish mostly came, or males who mostly came over here to colonize. But, the Spanish basically had to run, with their tails between their legs, basically, here to El Paso, to Isleta. That's how we have the Tigua here. The Tiguas were part of the mission complex in Santa Fe. The Pueblos revolted at Santa Fe, which was the colonial capital for the Spanish Empire. Decimated that. The Spanish hauled ass down here, fleeing from destruction, and they set up posts here in East El Paso, right? The Tiwas, right? They were part of that mission. They were from there. They were Pueblo Indians that were, I guess, proselytized. They were, they were being converted into being assimilated into this way of life, and they had to flee together, right? Whoever was able to flee, pick up their bags fast. Really interesting story. So it was almost one of the most complete victories of Native American resistance in this time period here, or ever really. Sad to say. It really expelled. They expelled basically all Europeans from that area. They were successful. This Pueblo Revolt was success for a time. So, anyways, by 1692, though, the Spanish launched counterattack and reconquered New Mexico again. However, they learned their lesson. Right? They're not going to be as brutal as they were now. They reformed laws now. Right? These Bourbon laws that came into effect were going to just outright torture and kill Native Americans. You just can't do that no more. They're part of the legal entity. They're part of the polity of Spanish colonial America. And so, because of the Pueblo Revolt, and because it was shut down, right? The Spanish did reconquer Mexico. Nonetheless, that made them turn their policies towards being more tolerant towards Indians, instead of just outright just trying to colonize them. Right, so that's the Spanish Empire. Now let's switch gears to the other empires. Right? So again, what are the objectives of these European empires in the New World? Right? There's a lot of shit going on in Europe already. They have their hands full already. So what are they doing over here, right? The first, it was that, right? Because they have, because struggles, inter-imperial struggles in the old world already, right? The New World was seen as, we could get rich over here to help us become stronger. So the first intention of Europeans over here in the New World is to bring the greatest amount of revenue to the mother country, mercantilism. That was the first intention, not to convert motherfuckers, right? It was to make money, extractive economics, mercantilism. The second, and this is all shared by all European empires over here in the New World. The second intention, second objective, you could call it European objective, is that success of this mercantilistic system over here in the New World depended on either harmonious relations with Native Americans or the elimination of Native Americans. So you either became diplomatic with the Native Americans and tried to gain the upper hand there, or you either just kill them off. And different empires took different courses in this respect. And then the third kind of objective or overall, I guess, shared intention between these European empires in the New World is that each one, right, developed their own distinctive way, colonial trajectory, their own colonial setup. So these are three kind of shared concepts here to have in mind as we talk between the Dutch, the French, and then the English. Okay? All right. So we have Francis Drake, Humphrey Gilbert, Pueblos. And here I have a picture. This is not in your textbook. This is another book. Right? Here's a picture of that city of Acoma, Sky City. So it's on top of a freaking plateau, a mountain, and that's what's called Sky City, right? Acoma. It's still around. I don't suggest you go visit it because of the COVID, and they're devastated right now. They don't have the resources as the rest of the nation because they're a reservation. But it's a beautiful place nonetheless. Absolutely mind-blowing. Okay. All right, so France, Holland, uh, overseas competition against Spain, basically. So Spain is still like the head honcho here in the game, not for long. So the Dutch, right? The Dutch are here. Like I said, they send Henry Hudson. Um, has this idea of the Northwest Passage. There's going to be there's a waterway. It's going to cut across this continent that we found and get us straight to Japan, China, Asia, and India. And he actually died. Well, I think he was killed actually, um, thinking he had reached some kind of Northwest Passage. And I said he was killed because he went exploring many times. I think like 3 times. Each time was a failure, basically. Right? The last one was like in Hudson Bay over there in North America. I think this is way too small. I kind of see it. Right in Canada, this big bay over here. So he thought he had reached the Northwest Passage because over there it was so frigid cold. It was so freaking cold that his shipmates, right, mutinied. Right, they rebelled against him, and they basically went back. They decided to turn back against his own will, against the captain's will, Hudson. And they put Hudson in a little boat, a lifeboat, with his son, and they just send him adrift. Never heard from him again. Yeah, poor Hudson, or Henry Hudson. But anyways, even though he was English, he was hired by the Dutch, and because of him, the Dutch were able to claim, you know, a certain area of land in North America, namely where we have the Hudson River, right, in New York over there, north. All right, so how did the Dutch get here? Um, Private companies again, are these private joint stock companies. Right? These are the precursors to the modern day corporations. So if you're into like stocks and whatever, right, you could buy stocks to a corporation. So I could buy if I want to. If I was rich, right, I would buy stocks for like not Tesla, but like I don't know, Apple or Amazon. Amazon's going to take over the world soon, so I'll buy stocks for Amazon, knowing and I'm part owner. So if Amazon goes down, but if Amazon loses business and plunk, I won't lose everything. I'll just lose what I invested. You're sharing the risk among other investors, but you're pooling together a big pool of money, right? In order to fund these adventures, explorations across the fucking Atlantic. Right? So this is what the Dutch are doing. Right? They're masters at finance at this time period. If you want shipping done, right, or you want anything financially done, you go with the Dutch. Right? These are the main like business endeavors that the Dutch have kind of monopolized. Shipping, they're really good shippers, right? Ships, and then they're really good with math, banking, basically. So the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company. I'm sorry, talking about the Dutch. Right? Gives us charter. Uh, the Dutch India Company is also exploring not just in North America. It's exploring actually East Indies, right, or what you think is India, right? And over there, setting up shop over there, setting up commercial networks with India and with in Africa, right? Goes to Cape Town, actually, and sets up a colony in Cape Town, South Africa. Which later it sets up a whole trajectory of which will end up in apartheid in South Africa. But the Afrikaners, these Dutch descendants that live in South Africa. Here it is, right? It's a Dutch East India Company that, when was it? In 1652, they go to South Africa, and because they want to kind of like dominate that trade there around there, ocean trade there in South Africa, they set up a colony, Cape Town. And then in 1660, all these, I mean, besides the Dutch, right, the English, the French are starting to lay claims to Caribbean islands. This is the West Indies. So you have the East Indies, which is the Eastern world, in India, in Africa, all that area, and then you have the West Indies. The Dutch West Indies Company, and the East Indie companies, right? So you have these companies trying to control, dominate that sector of the world of commerce. It's this mercantilism again, right? But instead of being directly tied to a monarchy, these are private companies, these are corporations. So the idea of like multinational corporations, right, or like globalizations, I should say instead, is already well established by this time period, by 1600s, by 1660s. Right? The world is already globalized. Right? Globalization, it didn't happen like in the 80s, 70s. It happened in the 1660s. All right, so that's the beginnings of the Dutch, right? They're the ones that are all about finance and shipping. Get that? What's the deal with this? Um, and then the Dutch are in competition with the French in North American mainland. So how did the French get here? Right, the French were into fishing. Right? They set up fishing outposts in Newfoundland. They have all these fishing um, stations in Newfoundland, which is like towards Maine and towards all that area up there. Right? So they're going, setting up fishing spots, and it's not just the French there. Also, other Europeans have set up um, outposts there for fishing. Right? And then they start going slowly towards into the Lawrence River, over by like Canada and like the Great Lakes area, and then into the Mississippi River down south. So that's the dominion of like the penetration of French Empire in North America. It's the Lawrence River, and then up and down the Mississippi River. Why in rivers, right? Why we need further easy to navigate? And pretty big rivers here. And then they found something. They kind of hid gold, not literally gold, but in metaphorically speaking, the cute little fur animals called beavers. So the beavers were a thing already before the French or the Dutch even got to these Great Lakes area and into like where it's like North New York, Canada, the area up there, Quebec, will be later Montreal, Quebec, all those areas. Saint Carolina, I think, was one of the forts that the French had. So they're up there, and the Native Americans already have like this life economy of beaver pelts. Basically, just like the fur of the beavers, right? The Native Americans use it for various purposes. In Europe, it's like this thing in fashion to have like a pelt hat. To have a hat made out of beaver fur. So what the French found out is like, wow, yeah, we didn't find no gold over here or silver or any Indians we could actually like enforce into labor, right? Instead, let's become friends with the Indians. Let's become commercial partners, and we'll trade with them what they want. They want guns. They want cool bottles. They never have medals and stuff like this, right? And we'll get these beaver pelts, right? So the skin basically of beavers, right? The fur of beavers, and we'll sell it in France, the fashion industry over here in Europe. And they made a killing, basically killing beavers. Well, actually, it was the Indians that were in charge of like killing of the beavers and getting the fur, or whatever they on the process exactly. And then they would sell it to the French and the Dutch as well. And the Dutch and the French would go take it to Europe, and then they would make hats out of them or fashion accessories, clothing, or. And that was really, really like profitable, extremely profitable. Where basically the Indians, because they wanted also to make money, they wanted more guns. They basically depleted the beaver population. So That was, and then there was also a couple of wars. There was something called the Beaver Wars. I guess I'll get into that. The Beaver Wars. Was what happening here is that, and this is complicated, but let me try to explain it as simple as I can. So you have here the five nations: the Iroquois. I can't even pronounce that. Iroquois, the five nations: the Mohawks. What is it? I forget. I can't remember this from the top of my head right now. I should look it up. It's pretty important. Hudson. Let's just look it up in Google. Huh? Okay. There we go. Oh, cool. So the Iroquois Confederacy. So who are they here? Let me see if I can find it. So you have the Mohawks. Well, first it was the first separate nations. So these are separate nations, but they come to a confederacy for purposes of defense and control of the beaver trade, basically in that area, even prior to European contact. But now we have the French and the Dutch here, and these guys are pretty strong, pretty formidable confederacy. So they have, they have rules. They have like basically they have like the. This is where the framers got like their ideas of how to deal with separate states. So you have the Mohawks, right, and they call themselves Kanyenkehaka, people of the Flint country. And then you have the Onondaga, people of the hills, Uga. This means where they land the boats. The Oneida, people of the standing stone, and the Seneca, people of the big hill. So these nations, right, they come together, and they're also at war with others, the Hurons, basically, other nations. So these Native Americans are already at war, trying to control the land and control the beaver trade there. Okay, but it's also very lucrative even before the Europeans come. And what's going on here is that this Iroquois nation becomes very dependent on the Europeans. They become dependent on the Dutch. So the Iroquois nation becomes dependent on the Dutch, right? And they're training with them, and it's really good. It goes really well, right? There were enemies before, and they become commercial partners, right? So you either eliminate the Indian, or you become harmonious with them and become diplomatic. So the Dutch are doing that, getting pelts, giving weapons for trade. Um, but however, one of the currencies that we're using is called wampum. WAMP, wampum. Basically, some beads made out of oyster shells. Um, and this was good. Right? The English and the French also would use these things. Right? This was like currency. But then there was a time around this time period. What would it be? 1633, 1640, around there. 1633. Let's put that. 1633, 1640s. The English stopped using the wampums as currency. So what the English do is that in order to get rid of this wampum currency, it's going to become obsolete pretty soon. They buy up all this stuff, basically, all these manufactured goods from the Dutch, which is all these wampums, right, on the Dutch. Right? So now the Dutch have a bunch of wampums. They're now worthless, and they have very few manufactured goods to sell in order to regain the balance of the economy here. So this kind of like cuts off the beaver trade with them. Right now, the Dutch are in dire straits. They don't have no guns to give to the Iroquois nations. And that creates the Iroquois nation. That creates a crisis for them too. So the Iroquois nation begins to encroach on the others. The Hurons block off the Iroquois from trading with the French. So the Iroquois are kind of isolated here on their own. So the Iroquois get pissed off and they begin attacking their neighbors. Right? And this begins the Beaver Wars, the so-called Beaver Wars. Basically, the Beaver Wars is a war of Indians against Indians. Right? And when this happens, right, this is classic divide and conquer. Right? The Europeans end up having the upper hand. Yeah, the Iroquois nation did win the war, technically, but it was an empty defeat. I mean, it was an empty victory. Right? They lost so many men. Right? They lost so many warriors. Right? Their population was decimated. They were never able to recover their population and thus their strength ever again. And from the Beaver Wars, this is one of those events that crystallizes European hegemony over Native Americans in that area. So now Europeans have an upper hand now. So that's the Beaver Wars. Right? Beaver, who would believe a beaver would create a war? Have you ever seen a Nickelodeon cartoon called Angry Beavers? Right? Really gives you a whole perspective on that. All right, so because of this, we have Quebec, Montreal, the French are settling right in these places by a guy named Champlain, Samuel de Champlain. I can't pronounce French, but de Champlain. And he sets up first in Quebec, right, and really just to control the beaver trade. And then he goes more deeper down river or up river, basically, and into Montreal. So Montreal and then Quebec. So those two cities are in Canada. There are British strongholds, basically. All right. So the French have a stronghold there now. The Native Americans not really a deal. The Dutch aren't really a deal either, right? So the French are doing now pretty well in North America, especially with this beaver trade, dominating that beaver trade there in the Great Lakes area. And they're actually really tolerant with their allied Indians, right? The whole book, I don't have it here with me, at disposal. It's called The Middle Ground by Richard White. And he talks about like this borderland area, this synthesized, this new, this emerging culture between that's like half French and half Indian, right? And he, like, for a long time, right, up until like the Beaver Wars and then later on with the Pequot Wars, for sure, you couldn't really tell who was in control. Right? Was it the Europeans, the French, or was it the Indians, right? And even the French were tolerant of intermarrying with Native Americans. So you had this like the mestizos down in Spain, in Spanish colonial America. You had this category of people called the Metis, Metis, Metis. And this was like half French, half Native American. So you have this syncretism of cultures coming together as well here in this Great Lakes area region, Canada, St. Lawrence River, and down into the Mississippi River, and then later on into like New Orleans, right, in Louisiana, are become all pretty strong French strongholds, colonies. And what was the company of the French? That would be a good idea to give you. But there were also private companies. Okay, I can't find it. No, I won't spend time looking at it. All right. So now let's go back to the Dutch. So Dutch was control of that area here. So then they're concentrated basically on a tiny slip of land, right? Mainly Manhattan Island. We know now as Manhattan Island. So that's like this Dutch stronghold there. And what they're really, they don't have beaver, right? They don't have the beaver trade no more. Um, and what they kind of like focus on is shipping, right? Whether it's shipping food to the other colonies, or whether it's shipping slaves. So because of this, right, the Beaver Wars, one of the effects of the Beaver Wars is that the Dutch become involved in the slave trade. And what's kind of ironic here, because the Dutch, compared to the other European colonists, even the French, they're the most tolerant of all. Right? Their New Amsterdam, which was the capital um, in the Netherlands, which is New York now. It was widely diverse, all kinds of ethnicities there. But even there was even a ghetto there of Jewish people, one of the first ghettos, um, to be kind of implemented, right, in the modern age. It was there. So yeah, you have Jewish people. It was just really diverse area. You have this governor, Peter Stuyvesant. Yeah, Peter Stuyvesant, and he even tried to like um, cut down on this diversity. Right, I think he was a Protestant. But he's really religious, anyways, and he hated all this tolerance. Right, there was, I think in New Amsterdam, for example, there was 150 homes, 200 homes. But there was 35 taverns. So it was pretty wild, right? And this guy was really like strict, right? This Peter Stuyvesant, the governor. Remember, these are private companies that initiated these ideas, right? That initiated these adventures, that settled these towns. So at the end of the day, it was the private companies, right? So I guess the board of directors, the Dutch West Indies companies, that had the final say. Yeah, there was a governor, Peter Stuyvesant, but he was under really the control of this private company. So Stuyvesant tried to implement some laws, trying to limit. Right? One of those laws was trying to get rid of these Jewish people. You had to become, I think, Christian. Right? He was trying to get rid of this like tolerance that the Dutch colony was known for. Right? And it didn't go through because the the companies were like, no, dude, like we need this. We need this diversity. We need this tolerance to make profit. Right? And that's why they got into the slave trade. It wasn't because they were like inherently racist, right? It was just because they were kind of like, this makes money, right? We lost the beaver trade with the French, and how are we going to make money over here in the world? Right, let's get into what the Portuguese are doing. So the Portuguese already were doing that, right, and making a lot of money, right? Selling slaves from Africa, dropping them off in the New World, and picking up raw materials, and going back, right? So the Dutch got into that in the North American scene. As a matter of fact, where is it? Was it 1607? No, it must have been 1620. Here's my other book here. Alright, aquí está. In 1619, there we go. Need to remember that. Jamestown, 19, right? So the Dutch this is like the first, I guess, load cargo of African slaves in what would become the U.S. So in 1619, a Dutch ship drops off 20 African slaves in Jamestown, and this kind of is like the beginning. Basically, this marks the beginning of the African slave trade, that would last into 1865, right? Right? So in 1619, it's about 12 years of the founding of Jamestown, which was in 1607. Right? So the Dutch, right, are the ones that really kind of introduced, right, slavery into the North American colonies. At this point, it's not really like it's a society with slaves, right? They're not really like they don't need slaves that much, right? They're just doing housework, or they're like servants, or like, later on, right, it becomes more intense. Right? We'll get to that why that's the reason. This is the Dutch, right? This is the history of the Dutch here. Long story short, they don't last, even though they were like pretty profitable. They become basically they become absorbed by the English colonies around them, and it was pretty much like a bloodless transition. It was pretty quiet. Transition from New Amsterdam to New York. All right, so how did that happen? So let's go into the English beginnings now. Okay, so I want to give you the background of what's going on here, or the other European powers. Right, we got to keep in mind this was a borderland area. Right, it was not just the English colonists that were out here. Right? They were actually the last ones to come to North America and settle. And first you have the Spanish and the Portuguese, then you have the French, Dutch, and then the English. They were the latecomers. And why were they the latecomers? Because there was a lot of shit going down in Europe, in England. And there was the War of Roses. There was a dynastic struggle between, right, the Catholic and the Protestant. Who was going to be the king? Who's going to what was going to be the religion of England, basically. And then there was issues with Spain up there as well. So I'm going to take a break here. Right? So I just want to lay out the context of where the English come in America. There's already people, right? Not just Native Americans, there's other imperial powers already laying claim to what will become the U.S. All right, and then the second part will be about actual English beginnings in the North American coast.